So I'm here to talk about urbanization, and maybe not so many of the topics that Lou had mentioned, but more about what's happening in the United States of America, and talking about what the definition of urbanization is, what the trends are, and how it might affect you. So let me give you a little bit of a background about what I've done up to now, what I'm doing. So I started off in this particular market as a commercial real estate broker, and then I was hired by Cornell University to do a couple of different things, most of which was to do the opposite of what I'm doing today, and that is to create a business park adjacent to the airport in Ithaca, New York. And Cornell had this vast amount of land that they had dedicated to a research park, which was floundering, and the vice president of the university said, we got to do something with this. Either we're going to sell the land or we're going to develop it in another fashion. Research parks had flourished in some of the major metropolitan areas that had universities next to them. Research Park, Triangle Park, the one that's that everybody knows that's near Stanford is now what we call Silicon Valley. So that all happened from intellectual property that was originated at Stanford University and then transferred over into new businesses. And so that's what my charge was to try to find businesses that could locate to this park. And so I spent 8 years at Cornell University. And during that time, I learned a little bit about real estate development. I knew that that's really what I wanted to do long term. So I cut my teeth there, got a little bit of an education. I had a decision to make early on about whether I wanted to go and work in New York for a development company. I had an opportunity to do that or to stay here, and I decided that I wanted to stay here. So I partnered up with a friend of mine by the name of Bob Doucette. Anybody here know who Bob is?
Right.
Yeah. Bob and I have been together now for 17 years doing different kinds of things, and Bob is known throughout the community as being instrumental in developing what's now known as Armory Square. And he had a vision, had an inspiration about what an urban community should look like, could look like. Saw these vacant buildings that were underdeveloped buildings that could be transformed into something else. And what he had a vision for was a community. And interestingly enough, as we look now back on it, it seems like it was meant to be, almost a matter of fact. But at that particular moment in time, it wasn't. And I remember when he developed the Hogan Block building, which put residences downtown for the first time in many, many, many years. Now, if we look back at Syracuse in the 1970s and the 1960s, there were a lot of offices downtown, but not too many people living downtown. And so Bob had this vision that maybe we should change that. Maybe we should also try to reinvent what the retail should look like on the ground floor. So I remember when he bought the Labor Temple building and put Possibilities on the ground floor as a tenant, and they've been there ever since, and probably one of the most prosperous restaurants in our community. And for a long time, Armory Square was the only place to go. You wanted to go downtown, you wanted to have some fun, you wanted to leave Manlius, that's where you went. You went to Armory Square. I remember when Bob was in the midst of trying to develop what's now known as Center Armory, and it was a parking lot. And everybody screamed, oh, you can't take our parking lot away, but he had another vision. Hey, we need to have density downtown, and these are some of the fabrics that make an urban community. So we're going to talk about that today. So he said, no, what I really want to do is put retail here, and I want to put residences above it, and this is back in the mid-90s, and people thought, oh, that's just never going to work. And of course now, it's a mainstay for your Armory Square, and there are a lot of little shops there that have thrived. And thrived in a market where you'd think it wouldn't really work, because you have the malls and some of the other things that have happened over the 60s and 70s that have pulled retail away from the downtown markets and put them in suburban markets. So what we saw happening in the 60s was an entire generation of our population moving from center cities out to the suburbs, and obviously the highways that were developed in the 50s and 60s help that to grow. In fact, now we're having kickback at that. And you know, you're all very well aware of what's happening with Route 81 now and the discussion about that. But the Route 81 was a divider, essentially, as a thoroughfare to be able to get to and from the suburbs. So I'm sure you all know about that. So let me ask a question before I get going here, because I want this to be interactive, if you don't mind. How many people have lived in a city outside of Syracuse, New York? Syracuse doesn't count. Right, that's quite a show of hands. Now, how many of you who raised your hand liked living in a city? Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions. What did you like about living in a city?
I like where I live. Walkability.
Yeah.
Walkability.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Easy,
Sense of community, friends nearby.
Excellence.
Public transportation.
Public transportation.
Proximity to issue.
Proximity to SU, okay?
Easy
Right.
access to theater and.
Right.
So cultural
Yes.
locations, okay.
Yes.
Well, those are all really great reasons, and that's essentially now what's sparking the revitalization of not cities that have been established for long periods of time, but other cities as well. So what's been happening over the last 20 years now, it started 20 years ago, is a couple of different things in different locations throughout the United States. But we've seen many of the cities that were in the Rust Belt, Pittsburgh, not necessarily Philadelphia, but Pittsburgh is a very good example. Why? Because a lot of the industry that was there left and the city became vacant. I mean, it was a ghost town. And now, over the last 15 years, a lot of those properties have been repurposed, for lack of a better word, to become residences, retail shops, and other urban centers. So that's what's been happening now. And now we have another generation of people, a population that has a different vision about what it's like to live. And that is the millennial generation, some of which are children of mine. I'm sure many of you have the same experience of children of ours now that want to live in cities. They don't want to live in the suburbs anymore. Now, we're going to have to see how that transfers over and whether it remains that way over the next 15 years, because as they begin to get married and have children, they may have a change of heart about that, but we'll see. So now what's happened is we've had these empty cities, and Detroit is now going through an incredible resurgence. I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening there, but now there's actually a family, a fairly well-endowed family, that has put millions and millions of dollars back into the core. Yeah. And so, well, actually, it's I don't know if it's the Fords themselves, but it's part of the Ford family. So now we're starting to see more and more people developing downtown communities. What's happened in Syracuse actually is a very good example of that. Syracuse was never really a residential enclave. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I'm going to do a little bit of it because I think it's important to the concepts and discussion that we're going to have today. When Bob and I first got together, we decided that we were going to take this building, which was called the Lowe's Building. Now I was acting on behalf of the owner to try to do something with that building. And I told him, I said, look, the opportunity here is not for this to continue as an office building. The office market has dwindled. There's no more activity in the downtown market in terms of offices. Everybody's moved to the suburbs. So we have to repurpose this building. Well, he had put a lot of money into this building, and he said, I don't think so. I said, well, tell you what, I'll buy the building from you, and I did. So Bob and I partnered, and we built 24 residential units in that building. We started off with 16, and then we built out the rest on the upper floor. But I have to say that most people thought we were absolutely crazy to do this. Why would anybody want to live in the heart of downtown Syracuse? Why would you want to do that? Well, it was incredibly successful right from the get-go because we had a feeling. We had an instinct. We didn't have any market studies. We didn't have anything that we could lay our hands on and say, oh, this is going to happen because somebody else said so. We had an instinct that this was going to be something that would be successful. So we had those units occupied before we had them rented out, because originally they were apartments. We had them rented out before they were completed, which we were shocked about. And then Bob and I decided, okay, we're gonna convert these to condominiums and we're gonna sell them. We sold every single one. Now, we had to go through a process because there were people that were in there. Some people wanted to buy their units and some people didn't want to. So we had a little bit of a transition there. But it was a great success. And then we had an opportunity. City of Syracuse had spent a lot of money on the Days building. I don't know if you remember this or not, but when Day Brothers was closed down, this was in the early 80s. I don't know if anybody remembers this. Yeah. So they closed the building down, and the City of Syracuse said, well, we have to do something with this building. And so they spent over $20 million, believe it or not, renovating this building because the facade was falling off and they had other issues with the building that, and it was, in my opinion, a great waste of money because they could have done it much better for a lot cheaper. But it was the City of Syracuse and they did it their way. And then they brought Niagara Mohawk, now National Grid, into that space, and a large part of that space, about 100,000 square feet of that space, to be able to be an anchor for that building. And then they brought other office tenants in there. But they really wanted to get rid of the building, and National Grid left. Bank of New York Mellon took over the space that they had, but they were starting to have, first of all, they had never developed the top floors. It was mostly vacant, and they were struggling financially with it. And so Bob and I said, look, we are willing to redevelop this property, and we got some help to do it. We got financial help from the state of New York, and we had a business plan. We were going to take as much of the upper floors as we possibly could and convert them to more apartments. And we were very successful in doing that too. Again, we built out these apartments and people wanted to be in them. And we had 24-hour, 7-day a week security, and that gave people a sense of comfort that they would be able to be in a building that was in the middle of downtown without having to feel threatened, which is actually not really a major real concern, but it's a perceived one. So a lot of times you have to deal with people's perceptions, not necessarily realities. And we did something that was very similar to what Bob had done with Possibilities. We brought in Cafe Kubal, and we had gone up to talk to Matt Goddard, who owns Cafe Kubal, when he had his little place up in East Syracuse. And we said, you know, this guy's making great coffee. We got to get this guy downtown. So we made a financial deal with him to come downtown, and he built out a space, and he spent a lot of money, had a great designer to do it. Now that location of Cafe Kubal is where people like to meet and greet one another, and it's become a real vibrant location within downtown. And it really was a cornerstone for our entire development. And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and that is that urban development only really works when you have a vibrant retail aspect that goes along with it. You can have all the people who are living there, and we have a very good example of this in Franklin Square. There are a lot of people who are living in Franklin Square, but there's nothing happening on the street. And you wouldn't know that there's any activity happening anywhere because nobody's walking outside and going to a shop or going to a coffee or whatever it might be. And that's a real problem in development, in my opinion, because without that vibrance, without the dynamic of the street traffic, the city loses its allure and its attractiveness. And that's what the millennials are interested in. The reason why these young people want to be in cities is because it's an exciting place to be. They get to be with their friends. They get to, they can be in small spaces. They don't want to hang out in their apartments necessarily. And there's a lot of development that's happening now in these smaller cities, or larger cities, where rents are very expensive. And so, sure, these young people they'll pair up with somebody else and share an apartment. But a lot of times what's happening now is micro apartments are being created where people are living, believe it or not, in 400, 200 square feet of space, and they have these buildings that they live in that have tremendous community services. I'm not talking about a pool, I'm talking about places where people meet, and having restaurants in the building, fitness theaters, all kinds of things that are all common to the population of those buildings. It's really been unheard of up until now, but that's the trend that's happening. So, yes,
We have tickets and we go down to the Landmark Theater a lot, and I hear in the evenings going to the shows, the one thing that people fear is their safety.
Yes.
And security.
yeah.
Granted, we're a different generation than what's hanging out at the Armory,
Mhm.
but is there anything being done downtown to make maybe people at Franklin Square are afraid to go
Oh,
to the
sure.
Armory
Oh,
because of
sure.
the safety and all of that?
No, that's an excellent point, and I think that it's a good point, because, you know, I'm developing another property now called the Empire Building, which is just down the street, very close to Onondaga, and that's a little sketchier location. And so we're doing lots of things to be able to securitize that building. But we're also doing things with the city and with the downtown committee to try to provide another level of security. So we're working with the police department now, and we're working with the downtown committee security, and we're now talking about actually hiring somebody that would be representative of the ownership of the real estate that's in that quadrant to be able to provide on-site security all the time on those corners. The corner that I think is the most concerning to me is the Jefferson Salina one, which I have a lot of interest in. You know, I have a lot of valuable assets that are there, so I want to make sure that the people that are around there are feeling secure.
How do you do that, with private security systems?
Yes, but they
Or
have
you beg the sheriff department to come
Well,
down there?
there are a couple ways of doing it. You can hire off-duty cops, but that's, that's not necessarily what we want to do. I think we want to have people that are dedicated. Now, the downtown committee has their own police force, and they carry guns and all of that, which I'm not knocked out about. I don't like guns being carried downtown. It's not my interest, but it's something that will help people to feel more comfortable. And when those people are there, when the security personnel are there, a lot of the riffraff go away. They don't want to be involved. Now, there's another development that's going to be happening on that quadrant, and I'm kind of going off topic here a little bit, but the Sibley's building that Bob and I were initially involved with is being redeveloped, and Bob's and my concept for that property, I don't know if you know where the Sibley's building is, but it's this pink building now. It's not the original building that Sibley's was in. It became a back office operation for many corporate clients that occupy that space. It's been vacant now for the last 5 years or so. But that has a garage that's attached to it. Bob and I designed the building so that a large portion of the building that's along Jefferson Street would be cut out, and it would become a plaza, very New York City style kind of building, where you will have retail that you'll walk up a flight of stairs off of Jefferson Street into this beautiful plaza, and I should have brought some photographs of it because it's quite interesting. But it's going to be this beautiful glass exterior and stone and glass. It's going to be quite attractive. And the Red House is going to be occupying about 40,000 square feet of that space in a portion of actually the garage. There's a portion of space that's sandwiched between parking levels in that building that is quite high in terms of ceiling height, it's about 22 feet. And so that was really ideal for the Red House to be able to relocate from where they are right now over on West Street to downtown. And they're gonna open probably, I think now, I'm gonna say January, February of this coming year, and that will change the dynamic. The reason I'm bringing this up is because with that new development happening downtown, that will cement even further the feeling that there's a community there and that there's activity. The more activity that you have on the street, the less riffraff you end up having right on those corners. And Bob went through the same kind of thing in Armory Square. I don't know if you remember what Armory Square was like, but there were nothing but transients in Armory Square until that project was developed. And now you don't see any of that, right? Why? Because those people are being displaced by people who want to shop or eat or go out. And so you don't see that many transients. Yeah, you see some of them, but not too many. And that same condition will occur when the Sibley's building is built, in my opinion. But we're going to try to work, as you pointed out, to provide more security so that people don't feel squeamish about going downtown. And as that parking garage, which is being redeveloped, they're going to have close to 750 spaces in that garage, which will be available at night. And that parking garage will also be secured by personnel and by monitoring. So people will feel more comfortable about getting out of their car, getting from the garage to other locations in that area. So that'll help too, yeah.
What does that do for university students who want to hang out at the Armory and have to walk through Brick City to get there? That's not a safe place to walk when you're walking down Harrison Street or Adams Street, but yet they're denied access to there unless they get a shuttle or they get a car.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why they had the connective corridor created, so that they would have the opportunity, the access through transportation that was being provided by the city and by the university to be able to go down there without having to walk all that way. But this is another part of our transformation of our downtown. This is kind of going off topic from what I wanted to talk about today, but it's important still that we talk about it. If you want me to change subject, just say, hey, done. But when we take down Route 81, and it's going to happen. Why is it going to happen? Because the impetus now is to be able to connect the university to the heart of downtown. And you know, we've been working with the city to try to get them to have a vision for what that corridor will look like. We think that there's going to be a lot less traffic that's going to be coming down there. In fact, I'm talking now with the new CFO of Syracuse University about transitioning some of the traffic that's happening now for the Dome events to come to the south side of campus, and then using Manley Fieldhouse as a feeder, which they've done in the past, but to a much larger degree, so that you don't have all of this traffic that's coming down to off of the ramp of 81 and clogging the main arteries of the city. That's another topic. What I'm trying to talk about now is that corridor, once that elevated highway is taken down, we'll have an opportunity to be able to put development there that's mixed use that will actually add to the vibrance of the community. One of the things that's critically important for cities to thrive is to be able to maintain its younger generations. And we've seen a lot of our, what we call brain drain, happening in our community. We have great universities, and they're all around us. Not only Syracuse University in Lemoyne, but Cornell University, universities in Rochester, and Utica. I mean, we have, you know, Colgate, Hamilton, all of these great universities that we have, but all of these young people are going somewhere else. Why are they going somewhere else? It's not the weather, I gotta tell you. I mean, people are going to Seattle. So it's not the weather, it's the fact that there's nothing happening in Syracuse. Nothing is going on, so we need to change that. We gotta change the paradigm. We have to help younger generations say, yes, there's an opportunity for me to be able to find employment here. I can live in a city that's dynamic and vibrant. So we as a community need to continue what we've started. We need to further the ambition that we have to be able to take some of the spaces that have been office spaces and that are dwindling, are been vacant, and try to transform those. And then the new developments that we have an opportunity for, and this is a particularly good one, taking down Route 81 gives us an opportunity to be able to put really, really exciting mixed-use spaces on the street. And how many people have been to Saratoga Springs in the recent past? Right?
Saratoga
Now,
Springs.
Saratoga Springs is a jewel in upstate New York. Why is it? It's unique. It's the only city that I know of in upstate New York that has national and local retailers that are thriving on their main street, right? You go down Broadway in Saratoga Springs, you'll see Gap, Banana Republic, but you'll see these other homegrown retailers that are thriving. There is no, what's particularly special about Saratoga Springs when the SPAC is not in session and the horses are not running? What's particularly beautiful about it that we don't have here?
Who's back?
Nothing, right? They don't have anything more there than we have here, but they have a beautiful city dynamic, and it's all built off of the infrastructure that was there, the buildings that were there along the street. And they went through a hard time about 20 years ago. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but there were a lot of these spaces that were not doing very well, but it's had a resurgence and it's come back and it's doing very, very well. There's no reason why Syracuse can't repeat that success along the corridor that we now know as Route 81. When that's taken down, we'll have a great opportunity to put some dynamic, new mixed-use developments in that location. And what will that do? Well, the more of that sort of development that happens, the more we're gonna have young people wanting to stay in our community. You know, Austin, Texas is a perfectly good example of a city that completely transformed itself around the university, right? The University of Texas happens to be there. It's also the capital of the state. But they transformed that city, so now it's one of the coolest places to live in the entire country, right? So these are the things that we need to be looking at locally. And there are other things that I want to talk about today too. I don't know how much time we have. I don't want to take up too much time, but how much time do I have, Lou?
If you could stay here till about 17 minutes to 12, that would be damn.
Well, I think it'll be that long. Yes?
You seem very secure about 81, which I think sounds wonderful, but when you read the paper, you have the feeling like this is so undecided.
Yeah, well, I think that there is another pocket of opinions out there, but I don't think that they're going to win out in the long run. Okay. But remember, the paper is there to create a dynamic so they can sell newspapers, so we can't lose track of that. But I
How do
think,
you guess?
yes.
I was a retailer in Syracuse
Yes.
for 25 years. I finally threw in the towel.
Yes.
It just became.
Lemp is still there, you know.
Well, and Eddie Kolakian is still there. I don't know how they.
I don't know how he does it either. I love Eddie, I just, you know.
I don't know how he does it. I mean, he's gotta be selling buttonholes.
And, well, he sells a lot of custom suits, that.
Well,
But who's wearing suits anymore?
look, I understand.
Look at me!
So the real question is, how does a Louis Kupperman, who's 25 years old, who wants to open up a high-grade, top of the scene men's store in downtown Syracuse, could he make a living?
Well, not yet, not yet, but
And how
I'll
about
tell
a
you why.
nice dress store?
I'll tell you why, Lou, because the market is changing.
Yep.
The market is changing. People are not buying suits anymore. We're gonna have 600 new employees with Aspen Dental coming down to the Sibley's building in about a year, okay? That deal's been struck. So those people, when they go to work, they're not wearing suits. They're wearing jeans, okay? They're wearing jeans and they're wearing short sleeve shirts or long
Sneakers.
sleeve shirts and sneakers, that's right. But that's the new, that's what's happening. That's, if you want to be successful in retail and you want to sell clothes, those are the clothes you're going to have to sell, because suits are out. Yes?
I'm wondering, who are the people who can afford the condos that are in downtown Syracuse? They're not those Aspen Dental employees.
Well, some of them are, because, look, there are.
They're not, unless they're the CEO of Aspen Dental.
No, he's up at Mallard's Landing. But, no, Bobby's up at Mallard's Landing for sure. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what my tenant mix is, okay? I have professors, I have doctors, I have lawyers, I have people who are engineers, other professionals who do not want to live in a house in suburbia. Those are the people that are my clients.
Are these people from the Syracuse area, or are they people who move into the area and
Both.
don't know the real estate market?
Both. I have people, a lot of people who come from outside of the area who want to live in an urban community. But there are other people who live in Syracuse who say, I don't want to mow my lawn anymore. I don't want to have to, you know, and one of the main elements of downtown that we are missing that's critical to the vibrance of downtown, the future of downtown, is a supermarket. Or
Yeah,
No
right.
Jams just closed. I felt so badly about that.
Yeah.
They're not my client, but they are feeding the community, right? And that particular type of community in that neighborhood. And I felt really badly that they were essentially forced out by somebody who was subsidized to be able to take on, or to be a competitor of theirs. But we absolutely need a grocery store downtown. When that happens, people won't have to get in their cars to go anywhere. And so, you know,
Call it Fairway.
I have, the president of Upstate happens to be a tenant of ours in Days, right? And they don't want to live in a suburban location, they want to be
Right, but the
downtown.
president of whatever is not gonna shop at Thrifty Shopper
That's correct. They're gonna go to a Trader Joe's that's downtown. That's where they're gonna go.
I would agree.
Yes,
I have to ask, where do you live?
I live in Manlius.
Everybody's got a family, I mean.
That's not true, Lou. I don't have a family. I have one daughter who lives with me. But the reason, there's a good reason for me to do that. I spend a lot of my time cycling. And I have to say that Manlius is one of the ideal places in all the United States of America to cycle. Now, people don't know that, and I'll tell you the reason why. Number one, we have nice hills around here. I love hills. Number two, we have pretty safe traffic. Number three, we have very wide shoulders, and we have very well-maintained roads. And we have lots of rural roads that are not occupied by any traffic whatsoever. So I am building an apartment right now downtown in the Empire Building. I should have brought some shots of that. If you go to empiresyracuse.com, you can look at some of the new project that I have going on. 51 new residential units, and on the top floor is a 2,000 plus square foot penthouse apartment that I'm going to take, and it has a beautiful view of the valley and also downtown. And I lived in downtown and lived in my building for 6 months. It was not because it was planned. I would like to be able to say, hey, well, I wanted to go down there for 6 months and see what it was like, so I could, have the experience, be able to share with my other tenants. But that wasn't the reason why. Anyway.
Rich, I have a question about retail, the
Yes.
challenges that Amazon poses for Main Street USA.
Yes.
And the rents you need to charge that, based on what Louis said, even if you have the right niche,
Yes.
that, you can start a small retail business and not be, overly weighted down by the rent costs, your overhead.
Yeah.
And, and along that, cities around the world are, as you know, are experiencing the same trend. But the problem is the rents are so high in many places, like Brooklyn,
Sure.
that a lot of people can't afford it or
What
are being pushed out.
what are rents based on?
Market.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand, that's right.
Yes, but if you have people who own, the top 1% who own lots of properties or are doing the Airbnb kind of thing, it's a
Sure.
problem. Barcelona's cracking down
Right,
on Airbnb.
and so is Venice and a
Yeah,
bunch
yeah.
of other places, that's
So
correct.
it's kind of a complicated question, but I just wonder how you do that, work through all that. in
Well, that's,
Syracuse.
this is where government needs to step in and can step in. I don't think that developers have complete control over what happens with the properties once they bring them on the market. And we had one individual who was trying to do an Airbnb in one of our units, and we just told him that that's not happening. And we now have it in our leases that they're not allowed. We have a sublet clause in there that specifically restricts them from doing this. So as a developer, there are some tools that we have at our disposal to be able to make that happen, or keep that from happening, I should say. But I think also government needs to be able to step in, and they're doing it in these communities. I think that Barcelona is a perfectly good example. Venice is another one. Venice has another problem. They have these ships, these cruise ships that come in,
Yes.
and they take over the city for a day, and they just waste the whole city.
And they don't spend any
Venetian,
money.
yeah. they
What's
don't-
Venice?
Yeah, and, huh?
What is Venice?
No, Venice, Italy.
Oh, Venice.
Venezia. So yes, this is happening, and it's happening in Rome, and it's happening in other places. Yes, government needs to step in and make sure that apartments that are supposed to be available for the population are not being taken up by third parties. Yes.
I just wanted to comment on NPR this morning. Amazon is building a second headquarters.
Yes.
And cities are actually competing with each other. They
Yep.
are making their list of qualities that Amazon might like.
Sure.
And Boston, Atlanta, come in.
The DC
And
area, sure.
one of the priorities was it had to be based around a vibrant university.
Right.
Where there's creative minds, lots of new talent coming
Yes,
out of.
right.
And a lot of what you said about connecting the university is primarily what they were saying they wanted.
Sure. And they come out of a community, they're coming out of Seattle, as you probably know, and they want to repeat what they've done. Now, they say that this new facility is not going to be a second facility, but another number one facility. And
That's right.
what are the chances of them coming to upstate New York?
Well, well, that's the other.
What I heard about the Amazon trajectory,
Mhm.
or the Amazon wish,
Mhm.
I spoke to a person who is involved in community development in our community, who is immersed in it on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis. And this is the conversation I had with him 2 weeks ago. He says there's 3 communities on the East Coast that could happen: Boston, DC, New York. New York, to make it happen, would have to partner with New York State.
What about Atlanta?
No,
Miami.
no. They do not have the required intellectual backbone to make it happen.
Right, right.
Boston has a Silicon Valley, New York City has a Silicon Valley, and DC has a Silicon Valley, and that's what's going to be required. That's what he told me, okay? There are a couple of cities, LA does not fit in. San Francisco doesn't fit in because of the cost of living. San Diego fits in.
But they want to be on the East Coast.
We want them on the East
No,
Coast.
they want to be on the East Coast.
Okay. Well, anyway, there's a jive to that. He said, New York State will partner because they can use Long Island as living and working area and up the Hudson River. I says, how does Syracuse play into this thing? He says, we're only 200 miles or 225 miles from Manhattan. And we could do things today that there is a Silicon Valley type of existence around here. Hamilton, Colgate, Cornell, the schools that there is that intellectual,
Yes.
look at the people in this room, guys. You're all bright. Okay, you all come from substance, you all have a quality education, and you're determined that that's what you want, the way of life you want to live. That's important. Now, will Amazon buy into that? That's a long, long story, but.
All right, I want to talk about one more thing before
I just want to say one more
Yes.
thing. Please. Boston has a problem with housing market. They have none. People are waiting 2 and 3 years
Oh,
to
sure.
buy a house out
Absolutely,
there.
absolutely.
So there are reasons why our area, if we could
That's right.
develop it,
That's
would
right.
really be attractive.
We want to be able to lure some of those
Yeah.
young people here. So as a community, this is one of the things that we need to keep in mind. Now, I want to talk about something else.
Doesn't upstate have a technology in Albany unit?
Yes, yes, we can talk about that too, but we're not going to talk about it now. What I want to talk about is what the future is in terms of development and what's happening in this country now and how this affects all of us. And that is that not only are we seeing people going back into cities, larger cities, but we're starting to see pods of cities that are growing up in areas that are outside the city center. This has happened for a long time in Virginia. So if you go to Reston, Virginia, Roanoke, you go to Alexandria or Arlington, Shirlington, for instance, there are new developments that are happening that are trying to create a community within a community. What do I mean by that? Well, and I'm trying to do this in Saratoga, by the way. I've got a plan for a project in Saratoga that's on about 2.6 acres in the middle of downtown. And I don't know if you know that much about Saratoga, but there's the city hall that's on one side, and there's a large plot of land. I'm not going to get into what the names of the streets are. Then there's a Hamilton, a hotel. What's wrong with me? A suite hotel, Hampton Suites Hotel on the other side. And the site goes like this. It's very angled off. And so the concept is to provide parking on that sandwiched area, if you will. And then on top of that, to create a platform. so that you can go from Broadway right into this, what I'm calling a village, okay? And I want you to keep this in mind. This is what's happening all over the country now, and villages are being created in places that people hadn't thought about before, and creating the dynamics so that people can live together. Now, what is interesting about this particular development is that it includes senior housing, workforce housing, market rate housing, and not only in apartments but condominiums, and about 30,000 square feet of retail to be able to support that, and the parking that goes along with it. So it's all, and there's office space there too, but that's not what the emphasis is here. But that's not what's happening in other markets. Other markets have all of those working together. So if you go to Reston, Virginia, for instance, you'll go and you'll see that this, in the middle of what would have been farmland 20 years ago, is now a village. And in that village, people are living, working, dining out, shopping. They have supermarkets there and theaters. You go to a movie theater. They don't have the symphony, but they have a lot of these other elements. And what's important about this is that it's encouraging not just the millennials to come to those locations, but for everybody to start living together as much as possible. Now, obviously, this is not assisted living care for seniors. This is people who are independent, people like my mom, you know, who's 87 years old but can still get around, right? She's just moved to a senior center. It's not assisted living, but she's independent within an enclave, if you will. But this would be a perfect thing for her. She's able to get around on her own. She can drive if she has to. I'd rather have her not drive. This is the reason why this works, because now you have a population that's integrated, right? And this is on the model that has been around for centuries in Europe. And now we're starting to reinvent this here in the United States. And we need to keep that model in mind, and we can do that here too. There's an opportunity for me to do it in Saratoga. I'm hoping I get the chance to do it. I don't have complete control, but I expect that I will. But this is the future. And one of my challenges over the next 5 years is to look for locations where I think that this kind of development can be successful. But I think that I think you're going to see this as being the future of development, a major part of development in our country.
You haven't mentioned schools, families.
Yes, that's true. And there are schools that are available in some of these locations. Reston is one of them. But remember, these are cities that are being created. So yes, schools are important, but this is not a major suburban population that's coming up. This is a different kind of community.
So most of the families do not have children.
That's correct.
Most of the units do not have.
That's correct. That is exactly right. Or they have small children, and they're in transition. And we'll have to see how that all plays itself out. Because I think we're going to have to see what happens in the suburban communities in the United States of America. Are they going to shrink? Are they going to be repopulated by other people? Is our population going to continue to grow where those suburban locations are going to continue to be occupied by families who want to be going to FM schools? I would think probably yes. But young millennials, not so much. Not now. 10 years from now, maybe. Yes?
For those people that go to Florida, you look at the villages, they started out small, and like out there, they're a humongous city now.
Yeah, for
You
now.
just get around in your golf cart down there.
That's correct.
You know, I mean,
That's right.
everything is there.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, but that population is what you see in this room for the most part.
Yes, but why couldn't you do that up here?
It could happen. The weather is.
The weather is a factor, I know.
Well, my ideal is to have a community that has a variety of population types. And I mean that, you know, and if we're able to subsidize those people through, you know, repurposing tax dollars to be able to support people who couldn't otherwise afford to go into these units, that's what we should be doing. That's what we should be doing as a population, as a community. We need to encourage people who could not otherwise live in the place that they work next door to. And this is a critical problem in Saratoga. The population who works in these retail shops cannot live in that community because it's too expensive. But if you're able to use state funding, other grants to be able to support people to live there who otherwise could not afford it, you'll be able to draw these people in. Yes,
You are doing development downtown.
that's correct.
How have you found the city of Syracuse as an entity for cooperation, et cetera, to help you?
Depends on who you're working with. Part of one of the main problems of the city of Syracuse is that you have fiefdoms that have been created, and that everybody, has their own voice and can say whether, you're allowed to do this, that, or the other thing. I mean, it's the fire department, the engineering department, I can go on and on and on, okay? There's no central location to go and say, here are my plans, you guys go ahead and approve it. You have to go to every single fiefdom and have them, check off their list of what it is that they want you to do. And a lot of times that has nothing to do with code, it's what somebody thinks or feels, and they have authority to be able to tell you yes or no. So, I think there are, and you're also dealing with people's egos. So the more egotistical somebody who is overseeing that particular department is, the more difficult it seems to be able to get it done. Yes?
Syracuse was recently named one of the big poverty cities. in the
Yes,
world.
top 13 in the United States of
Right.
America.
I-
Over 30% of the population in the city of Syracuse is in poverty.
I've
That's a
worked
big number.
with kids in Syracuse City schools who fall into this category.
Mhm.
Is there any way that developers like you can get to the schools and say, we are going to need builders, we are going to need salespeople, we are going to need entry-level people?
You have to have the desire of the population to want to have that happen.
But if you don't go out there and offer it, because otherwise you're going to continue to have the have-nots in the middle of
I
the
get
city
that.
and the haves.
It's a question of the chicken and the egg. And this is my experience, okay? And I wish it were different, but my experience is that there are a lot of this population who are not interested in education, they're not interested in working, and this is the hip-hop culture that's been developed where, you got people that are going out and shooting. Here's an interesting statistic. I happen to be an Italiophile, if I could use that word, Italophile, and I spend a lot of my time in Europe. But there are more shootings and killings in Syracuse, New York, than there are in the entire country of Italy on a daily basis. Keep that in mind. You're talking about a population of 140,000 people versus 60 million, okay? What gives? Is it that these people don't have the opportunities to be able to move forward, or is it that they're not taking advantage of the opportunities?
Do they want to?
They don't want to.
Well, that's my point. Or is it a matter of desire? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not a social worker. I don't know the answer to that question. But I'm gonna tell you, as a developer, I have trouble when I've got people at the rescue mission who are being fed every morning and then have no program to go to or I put on the street to go to the drug dealer that happens to be on the corner of Clinton and Onondaga Street. I'm doing a development that's literally a half a block away, and I have to concern myself with the fact that there's nobody watching these people, and I want these people to survive, I want these people to do well. Why? Because if they do well, the community does well as a whole. And how do I encourage that to happen? Well, I had conversations with the rescue mission. Can't you provide these people with programs rather than putting them out on the street in the morning?
You have to get them when they're in school, when they're young, and tell them that there's going to be something out there eventually for them. Otherwise, they just
But
transition into.
that's not the job of a real estate developer.
But I'm saying, can't a real estate developer work with the school district, work with the city,
A
and
real
get
estate
them to
developer-
get, even if it's more social work?
I think if there's a demand, then there will be a supply.
I think
If there's a demand, look, the one thing I don't want to do, and here's another example, yes, we want to encourage young people to go to school, we want young people to be able to have the opportunity to be able to get an education. The community has to provide a safe environment for that to happen. And that particular community, that particular section of the community needs to favor education. They need to say, education is a valuable resource to you, take advantage of it. But outside as a developer, for me to put a development down in the middle of, you know, the south side of Syracuse, and expect that that's going to work, who am I gonna get to occupy these spaces? I'll have Section 8, and then, you know, I've got, that's not the kind of development that I wanna be doing.
I don't think it's a section of the community. I think, you know, I graduated from Nottingham in 1971. And I went to my 40th class reunion. I moved out of the community after college.
Yeah.
I went to my 40th reunion, and part of it was a tour of Nottingham. And I have to tell you, Nottingham had not changed. It's not right. A school building after 40 years should be dramatically different. That's a community issue. That's not a section of the community. That's a
Well,
city
Nottingham is
problem.
an interesting example. Why? Because Nottingham has a bunch of different, I mean, Bob Doucette's children went to Nottingham, okay? So you have a population that's mixed there. And even though I didn't want my children going to Levy, I would have had no problem having them go to Nottingham, okay? So there's a very different thing going on there. And my kids initially went to Ed Smith, and it was a great school. Now I've heard it's changed. It's not the same school it was, that it's now not the excellent school that it was back then when my kids went.
That's because of Ed Smith was an imbalanced population in that they had professors and educators and
That's right.
academics, children living in that
But my
area, going
point
to that
is,
school.
it's a systemic problem. It's not a problem with one part of the city or another part of the city.
Right.
It's a city problem that they haven't coped with, obviously, over the 40 years.
Yes.
Because there's no way, I was a teacher for 34 years.
Yeah.
There's no way that a building should not change in 40 years.
Yeah.
There's no way that they should be bragging about the fact that they've increased their graduation rate to 60%.
Yeah, well, look, I'm not a social worker, I'm a real estate developer. I don't have the expertise to be able to expound on this issue eloquently, so I'm going to not do that. Yes,
What is your take on the failure of Shopping Town and what might the future hold for those of us that are not fans of Destiny?
well, that's a great question, because I have a great concept for the land that Shopping Town is in now, and I don't think that any of the buildings that are there should stand. I think it should be all torn down, and I think you should put a village there. And they could have done the same thing now. I know that there's a tremendous dependence on the big box operations that are now in what used to be Fayetteville Mall, right? And it'll be interesting to see if they survive, because I think that they won't. I think the Amazons of the world will take those guys down in the long run. What will survive in my opinion, is local retailers who are doing things that people can't find on the internet as easily. I think, this is just my personal opinion, I don't like buying clothes on the internet, because whenever it shows up, it's the wrong size, it's the wrong color, it's this, that, but I love to be able to shop locally. And there are lots of things, we have to think as a community about what kind of retail will survive the Amazon boom, if you will. And I think that villages who are integrated, where you can go outside and you can go to a clothing store, whatever it might be, or other shops, can thrive if there's a community that supports it and people are not having to get in their cars to go and do it. Part of the problem, and I don't know if you know this or not, but malls are not surviving. The lifespan of malls is about 15 years physically. And now, nobody is reinvesting in these malls. It's very difficult for malls to, I don't think a new mall has been created in the United States of America. I think the Destiny was the last expansion that I know of, at least in upstate New York. I don't know, it's not my area of expertise. But if you take a property like Shopping Town, which is at the crossroads of some vibrant arteries in the community, and you were to put a village there, and you had a grocery store there, and you had a bookstore there, and you had some other things where people could hang out and just be, it would work.
I've thought for years that they should take Shopping Town as is and develop it into small apartments.
Yeah.
And a grocery
People have
store.
done that, you know. That model has occurred in the United States of America, where you take a mall, you leave the corridors in, and then you create apartments. The problem with that is that they don't have many windows, and you're talking about spaces that are incredibly deep. I mean, I developed a department store, so I know what it's like to be in that kind of an environment. And our apartments, by the way, on a per square foot basis, are about 2/3 of the market. Because we have large spaces, because we had a department store to deal with, and the amount of fenestration, glasswork that we had that was available for every particular unit was actually pretty small, based on the unit size. So when you walk into most of our units, you're gonna say, oh my God, look at all the space. You know, but that model has been done in the United States of America. We'll see if it's successful or not. But my opinion is that in order for new developments to work, they have to have connectivity. They have to connect people to other people. And I think that retail that is going to survive will also work on that model, where people are interested in communicating and connecting with others. And we'll see how that works. Yeah.
How are you doing with Sibley's? Do you have a lot of space to fill?
Well, there'll be about 35,000 square feet of retail space.
You
that-
financially connected to the Sibley operation?
Not any longer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I designed it.
Okay, but you're done with it? Okay.
I sold my interest. It was too many cooks in the kitchen. And so Bob and I together decided, time for us to do something else. We did what we felt was the important part. We designed the concept, we brought the tenant to the deal, and then we sold our interest. Yep.
Are there any developers in the country now specializing in rehabilitating closed malls?
Well, that's the question that was just asked. Yes. And, you know, they're trying, the problem with malls is that they're typically in suburban locations. And a lot of these retailers are struggling now because of the Amazon effect, for lack of a better word. And I don't know if they're gonna continue to survive. My feeling is that that real estate design doesn't have a future. I don't think that space can be repurposed like office space can be repurposed for residential. It's not that easy a transition. That's just my opinion. Yeah.
Do you have a vision of how self-driving cars will impact communities in the future?
I have an opinion,
Yeah.
which is not worth much. I think, well, there are experts out there that say that we're gonna have more congestion, we're gonna have more problems, because people are gonna be taking these onesie, twosie trips, and then we'll have all these cars on the highway. I don't know if that's the case. My hope is that self-driving cars will liberate certain people who have a hard time driving now to be able to get into a car and go to a particular location. But my hope is that as we develop our country and as real estate development takes hold in the fashion that we've just discussed, less people will have to go in their car to go anywhere. That's really what we want to do. We want public transportation to be the key. And I don't know if you can use self-driving cars, automated vehicles, to be able to take on that particular role. Don't know the answer to that question. Yes?
Syracuse, from what I've heard, it has the infrastructure for light rail. Where's that? Does that factor in any of your thoughts?
I don't know what the cost of developing that really is. Having the infrastructure there at one time doesn't mean that it can be reinvented or remember, I don't know if anybody remembers Ithaca, New York, but Ithaca, New York, I've seen photographs of Ithaca, New York about these trams that were going up these, up to campus, right? And that was the way people were transporting one another or themselves. I don't know the answer to that. I think that what buses provide now are probably as good as you're going to get in terms of the types of transportation you're gonna have. It's not as sexy, it's not as appealing as being able to have a rail system of that sort. I just don't know. But the idea is to have a walkable city. It's not about just getting on a tram and going from one block to the next. It's about walking. You know, I'm shocked at how little time it takes me to walk from one side of downtown to the other side of downtown. It takes me 7 minutes, 8 minutes by foot. And people are getting in their cars to drive that. And I'm thinking, what for?
Does your original building have parking inside?
It does. The Lowe's building does not, because we have the theater there. But the Days building does. We have about 100 car parking in that building now.
Where do you park there? How do you
You go in
access
from
it?
Warren Street. You access it from Warren Street.
Through the tunnel by the old straps?
Well, you go past the galleries and it's on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
And there's a little light there, a little traffic light there for you to be able to let you know, because it's a one-way, you know, and so you gotta, there wasn't room for two streets, if you will.
I knew there was a loading
Two
area back
driveways.
there.
Yes, there is. There is a loading area back there.
Have you
Yes.
noticed an impact of the Hotel Syracuse opening?
I haven't. I wish I could say yes. I'm a little disappointed with, is it 111 Waters? I can't remember the name of it, but 11 Waters. I just didn't feel like that was a very homey feel walking into that space. I felt it was a little too antiseptic for me, and I, you know, restaurants are hard to make work, and you have to have, you know, it's not about location, interestingly enough, because I think the possibilities show that if you have the right ingredients, no pun intended, but if you have the right ingredients, people will show up. I just don't think that 11 Waters is gonna make it. Yes?
The one, apropos question about light rail, the one effort that was attempted a number of years ago, I forgot whether it was Amtrak or something, but there was a, utilizing the existing track system, there was a train that went from downtown, I think, out to Destiny. And the original concept was to have it, have a terminus in the Janesville area, and have parking out there.
Right.
And have commuters park there.
Right.
And then take a train into work at downtown, for that matter,
Right.
to go
Right.
to Destiny.
Right.
That collapsed financially.
Right.
Partially, probably, as a consequence of the relative ease of driving a car from that area and driving. I mean, I commuted downtown and parked in downtown.
Let me ask
for
you a
40
question.
years.
If the ballpark had gone downtown, how would that have changed that?
Dramatically. That's where it belongs.
Yeah, because they would have not been able to create the extent of parking that exists on where it was actually.
Right, but I gotta tell you, I know
And-
that.
And so it would have made sense for people to park at a remote site and take a train to.
I gotta tell you that parking downtown is not as much of an issue as people think it is. People, on the street it is, but there are lots of places to go and park your car. The Harrison Street garage is about 2/3 full. I mean, you can park downtown without a problem. There's a whole other garage that was initially built for the hotel that has been sold to another group. That isn't occupied at all.
And the cost is not what it is in big cities.
True.
Cost of parking.
That's true, but that's also supply and demand, right? But, you know, with the advent of this new 750 car parking garage coming online right across from where you're talking about, I mean, on the other side of Clinton Street, right? If you had a ballpark down there, how would our city have been thought of differently than it is today?
Well, you wouldn't have an Armory Square.
Oh, no, you would have Armory Square.
but-
Oh, you would have Armory Square, yeah.
I mean,
I think you'd have a whole
area.
other dynamic of
Yes.
downtown that doesn't exist today. And you'd have families coming downtown that are not coming downtown today, right?
You could have cleared out space over there.
Well, they had it all designed, it was all ready to
There
go,
was
in this
ready to do
particular
that.
parking lot that's called the trolley lot, by the way, that's the name of that. And there are about 50 to 60 cars a day that park there, that's all.
It's expensive.
No, it's 35, we made a deal for Aspen Dental to be able to park there for $30 a month.
That's okay. which is cheaper than parking at the medical school. The nurses and everybody park it.
All right, I think my talk is done. Thank you very much for attending.
Yeah.